Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. I've been debating whether to share this story for a while now, but after everything that happened, I figure other people dealing with entitled neighbors might get a kick out of how this all went down. This happened about 6 months ago, and I'm still kind of amazed at how perfectly everything worked out. So let me give you some background first. I own what my family has always called the ranch, though it's not really a working ranch anymore. It's about 120 acres that's been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather bought it back in the 1940s when land out here was still cheap, and it passed down to my dad, and then to me when he died 5 years ago. The property isn't huge by ranch standards, but it's big enough that you can't see the neighbors from the main house. There's the original farmhouse that I've been fixing up, plus several large barns and workshops that I've converted for my business. I'm a veteran, did my time in the Army, and used my GI Bill to get an engineering degree. These days, I run a custom carpentry business out of the workshops. High-end stuff mostly, built-in cabinets, custom furniture, that kind of thing. People pay good money for quality work, and I like the peace and quiet out here. The whole reason I moved back to the family land was to get away from city life and all the petty drama that comes with it. I'd had enough of apartment living, nosy landlords, and people who think they can tell you what to do on your own property. Out here, I figured I could work in peace and not bother anyone. That was before the development showed up. About 2 years ago, some developer bought the 50 acres adjacent to my eastern property line. They clear-cut the whole thing and put up one of those fancy housing developments. Big houses, perfectly manicured lawns, the works. The kind of place where every house looks exactly the same and costs more than most people make in 5 years. They called it something pretentious, but I just refer to it as the development. Now, I want to be clear about something important here. My property lines are well marked. I'm not talking about some old rusty fence posts from the 1950s. When I inherited the place, one of the first things I did was hire a surveyor to mark the exact boundaries, and then I put up proper signage. We're talking professional-grade aluminum signs, reflective coating, the works. Every 50 feet along the fence line, there's a sign that says private property, no trespassing, or violators will be prosecuted. The main entrance has a big steel gate that's about 20 feet wide. I usually leave it closed but unlocked since I get deliveries for the business. The development people seemed okay at first. The construction was loud during the day, but they were reasonable about it. No work before 7 a.m. or after 6 p.m., that kind of thing. Once people started moving in, things were pretty quiet for the most part. But then the HOA got involved. I should probably explain something about HOAs for anyone who's never had to deal with one. An HOA is basically a group of people who buy houses in the same neighborhood and then decide they can make rules for everyone else. They collect fees, maintain common areas, and generally try to keep property values up by making sure nobody does anything too crazy with their house. The problem is, some of these HOA people get a little power and suddenly think they're the rulers of their own little kingdom. They start thinking their rules apply to everyone, even people who never agreed to be part of their HOA in the first place. Which brings me to the incident that started this whole mess. It was a Tuesday morning in early spring. I remember because I was working on a big dining table order for a client who was paying me 10 grand for a custom piece. Real complex work with multiple types of wood and these intricate inlays that had to be perfect. I was in the middle of a glue-up, which is one of those steps where timing is everything. You've got about 20 minutes to get everything clamped and positioned before the adhesive starts to set. I was wearing my respirator because of the fumes and had my noise-canceling headphones on because I'd been running the table saw earlier. The workshop can get pretty loud with all the equipment, so I've learned to protect my hearing. I happened to glance up at one of the security monitors I have set up to watch for delivery trucks. That's when I saw them. 2 identical white pickup trucks were slowly making their way up my quarter-mile gravel driveway. Both had some kind of logo on the doors that I couldn't quite make out from the camera, but they definitely weren't delivery vehicles or anyone I was expecting. Here's the thing that immediately got my attention. To get to my driveway, these trucks had to pass my main gate, which was closed. They also had to drive past at least a dozen no trespassing signs. There's no way anyone could accidentally end up on my property. I killed the power to all my equipment, pulled off the headphones, and stepped outside to see what was going on. As the trucks got closer, I could see the logo on the doors clearly. It was the development's name with some kind of official-looking emblem underneath. The trucks were those expensive crew cab models, probably worth $60,000 or $70,000 each. Pristine white paint jobs, chrome everything, the kind of vehicles that have never seen actual work. Both trucks pulled up and parked right in front of my main workshop. 2 men got out. The first one was this guy in his 50s, wearing a polo shirt that probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries. He had a clipboard and was trying to look official. The second guy was bigger, maybe 45, also in expensive casual clothes, but with the kind of attitude that said he was used to intimidating people. I walked out of the workshop, still wearing my leather apron and wiping sawdust off my hands. I had my phone in my pocket and something told me I might need it. The guy with the clipboard spoke first. He introduced himself as the HOA president and said his name was something generic. The big guy was apparently the grounds committee chair. They called themselves the neighborhood patrol, like they were some kind of official law enforcement. The HOA president told me they were conducting what he called a quarterly safety and compliance inspection. He said they'd received reports of unpermitted commercial activity and unsightly structures on my property. When he said unsightly structures, he gestured toward my barns, which are probably in better shape than his house. I looked at these two guys for a moment, trying to process what they'd just said. Then I explained the situation as clearly as I could. I told them they were a long way from their development. I pointed out that they were currently trespassing on my property. I explained that my land was not part of their HOA and never had been. I mentioned that they'd driven past about a dozen signs telling them this was private property. Then I gave them what I thought was a reasonable warning. I told them to get back in their trucks and leave my property immediately. This was their one and only chance to handle things the easy way. That's when I pulled out my phone and very deliberately started recording. I took several clear photos of both men, their trucks, and their license plates. I made sure they could see exactly what I was doing. The big guy didn't like that at all. He stepped toward me and demanded to know who I thought I was. He started talking about their community charter like it was some kind of constitutional document. The HOA president tried to play good cop. He said they could do this the easy way or the hard way, but they needed to inspect my barns for code violations. He claimed they had a right to make sure their property values weren't affected by what he called this situation. I looked at both of them and said the conversation was over. Then I turned around and walked back toward the house. Now here's where these guys made their big mistake. A normal person who'd just been told they were trespassing and needed to leave would have gotten back in their truck and left. Maybe they would have been embarrassed or angry, but they would have left. These two didn't leave. In fact, they seemed to think they'd won some kind of victory. I watched from the house window as the HOA president gave the big guy a high five. Then the president pulled out his clipboard and started walking toward my first workshop like he owned the place. The big guy leaned against his truck like he was settling in for the long haul. That's when I knew I needed to escalate things. I made 2 phone calls from inside the house. The first call was to the sheriff's office non-emergency line. I explained that I had 2 active trespassers on my property who were refusing to leave and attempting to enter my workshops without permission. I told them I had the whole thing on video and gave them my name and address. The dispatcher said a deputy was finishing up another call and would be out to my place in 20 to 30 minutes. The second call was to a local business that I'd used before. There's this guy who runs a heavy-duty towing company that the county contracts with for semi-trucks and other big vehicles. I'd met him a few years back when a delivery truck broke down on my property and we'd stayed in touch. I called him up and explained the situation. I told him I had 2 pickup trucks parked on my driveway, blocking access to my workshop, and that the owners were trespassing and refusing to leave. I asked if he could come remove the vehicles. He started laughing before I even finished explaining. Apparently, this wasn't the first time he'd dealt with people from the development. He said it would cost $600 per vehicle for an unauthorized private property tow, plus storage fees. He asked if I was okay with that cost. I told him to bill me and come on out. What happened next was probably the most satisfying 10 minutes of my entire year. This massive tow truck showed up before the deputy did. We're talking about a serious commercial wrecker, the kind they use for 18-wheelers. The engine rumble was so loud you could probably hear it from half a mile away. The driver got out and he was exactly what you'd expect from someone who makes his living hauling broken-down semi-trucks. Big guy, work clothes, no-nonsense attitude. The HOA president and his buddy had been trying to peek through the windows of one of my workshops when the tow truck arrived. They looked absolutely shocked. The tow truck driver didn't waste any time with explanations. He walked right up to the 2 men and told them they appeared to be lost since this was private land, and he'd been authorized to remove their vehicles. The HOA president immediately started panicking. He said the driver couldn't do that it was harassment, and that they were official something or other. The tow truck driver just laughed and ignored them completely. He started backing his wrecker up to the first pickup truck, which was conveniently blocking the second one so neither could leave easily. That's when things got really interesting. The deputy sheriff finally arrived just as the tow truck driver was hooking up the first pickup. She was a professional-looking woman who seemed like she'd dealt with this kind of nonsense before. The HOA president ran over to her patrol car before she even got out. He started talking rapid fire about how some lunatic was stealing their trucks and how they were being harassed while conducting official patrol duties. The deputy held up her hand to stop him, then walked over to where I was standing on my front porch. She greeted me by name, which made it clear that we'd met before during some previous issue. I explained the situation calmly and professionally. I told her that 2 men I didn't know had driven past my gate and multiple no trespassing signs. I said I had them on video, admitting to being on my property without permission. I explained that I'd asked them to leave and they'd refused, instead attempting to enter my private workshops. Then I showed her the video I'd recorded. The deputy watched the whole thing, and her expression got more serious as it went on. When it was finished, she walked back over to the HOA president. She asked him directly if he'd been informed that he was trespassing and had refused to leave. The HOA president started sputtering about their charter and code inspections and community standards. The deputy cut him off. She explained that they had no jurisdiction on my property, that this was not their land, and that what they were doing was criminal trespass. Then she turned to the tow truck driver and told him he was clear to proceed with removing the trespassing vehicles. That's when both HOA guys completely lost it. They started yelling and making demands and threats. The deputy very calmly explained that they had 2 choices. They could call someone to pick them up, or she could arrest them for criminal trespass and disorderly conduct. I watched from my porch as both of their expensive pickup trucks got loaded onto the wrecker and hauled away. The 2 men were left standing in my driveway with no way home except calling for help. The deputy took some notes, gave me a case number for her report, and told me to call if they came back. Then she left. The HOA president and his buddy had to walk about a mile to the main road to wait for whoever they called to pick them up. I went back to my workshop and finished the dining table, but that wasn't the end of the story. Not by a long shot. 3 days later, I found something in my mailbox that almost made me laugh out loud. It was a formal letter from a law firm representing the HOA. The letter was full of legal-sounding language, but the basic message was simple. The HOA was demanding that I pay the $1,800 in towing and impound fees for their trucks. On top of that, they wanted $5,000 for what they called humiliation and damages. They gave me 2 weeks to pay up, or they threatened to take legal action. I read that letter 3 times, and each time it made me angrier. These people had trespassed on my property, ignored my warnings, refused to leave when asked, and now they wanted me to pay for the consequences of their own actions. That's when I decided to take the gloves off. I took that letter to the best civil litigation attorney in the county. Her office was about 30 miles away, but she had a reputation for being sharp and aggressive when she needed to be. I walked into her office with the letter and all my documentation from the incident. I had the video, the photos, the deputy's report number, and the towing receipts. I told her I wasn't interested in defending against their threats. I wanted to sue. She looked over everything I had, watched the video twice, and then smiled in a way that made me think she was looking forward to this case. She explained that what the HOA had done wasn't just annoying or rude, it was actually illegal in several different ways, and there were specific laws that allowed property owners to recover damages. We filed a civil lawsuit against the HOA as an organization, plus the 2 individual men who had trespassed. The lawsuit claimed damages under several different legal theories. There was civil trespass, which carried a statutory fine. There was interference with my business, since I'd lost a full day of work dealing with their nonsense. We asked for all legal fees to be covered by the defendants, and we included punitive damages for their willful and blatant disregard for clearly posted signs and direct warnings. The total we sued for was $22,500, plus all legal fees. My attorney attached some serious evidence to the lawsuit. There were high-resolution, time-stamped photos showing their trucks driving past the no trespassing signs. There was a full transcript of the video I'd recorded. There was a copy of the deputy's official trespass report. Basically, we had them dead to rights. The response was faster than I expected. Within 48 hours of the lawsuit being filed, my attorney got a call from someone representing the HOA's insurance company, not their lawyer, their insurance company. Apparently, when an HOA's directors get sued personally for doing stupid things in their official capacity, the HOA's liability insurance has to cover it, and insurance companies don't like to waste money on cases they can't win. The insurance representative told my attorney they wanted to settle immediately. My attorney called me with the news, and we talked about what kind of settlement would be acceptable. That's when I came up with what I thought was a brilliant idea. I told my attorney that I'd accept $25,000 to settle the case, but the settlement had to include 2 non-financial terms that were just as important as the money. First, the HOA board had to issue a formal written apology that would be read aloud at their next official meeting. Second, they had to add a binding, permanent amendment to their HOA bylaws explicitly stating that they had zero authority or jurisdiction over my property. The amendment had to identify my land by its full legal parcel number so there could never be any confusion in the future. My attorney presented these terms to the insurance company, expecting them to negotiate. They agreed to everything immediately. Apparently, $25,000 was a small price to pay to make this problem go away, and the other terms didn't cost them anything. 2 weeks later, I had a check for $25,000. I used $10,000 of it to install the security upgrade I'd been thinking about for years. Solar-powered automatic gate with a keypad, intercom system, and 4K security cameras that could read license plates from a quarter-mile away. The rest went straight into my savings account. The HOA sent me a copy of their formal apology, which was exactly 1 sentence long and about as insincere as you'd expect. I had it framed and hung it in the bathroom of my main workshop. But the best part came about a month later. I got a call from a neighbor who lives outside the development but has friends who live inside it. He was laughing so hard he could barely talk. Apparently, he'd gotten hold of a copy of the development's updated community maps and meeting minutes. My property was now officially listed on their HOA documentation. They'd drawn a big red dotted line around my entire 120 acres and labeled it as what they called an indefinite no-go zone with a note that said per legal settlement. Essentially, I'd forced them to officially acknowledge that they had no authority over my land, and now it was written into their permanent records. The neighbor told me that at the next HOA meeting there was apparently a very awkward conversation about how to make sure nothing like this ever happened again. The new policy was that no HOA representative was allowed to set foot on my property for any reason, ever. A few weeks after that, I was working in my shop when I heard a vehicle coming up the driveway. For just a second, I wondered if the HOA people were stupid enough to try something again. But when I looked at the security monitor, it was just a UPS delivery truck. The driver got out, dropped off a package, and left without any drama whatsoever, just the way I like it. I'm still living out here on the ranch, still running my carpentry business, and still enjoying the peace and quiet. The automatic gate works perfectly, and I haven't had any uninvited visitors since the incident. The development is still there, of course, but now there's an interesting dynamic. According to my neighbor friend, the HOA is actually much more careful about everything they do now. Word got around about what happened, and apparently some of the other residents started asking hard questions about the HOA's authority and how they spend their money. I heard through the grapevine that the HOA president ended up stepping down a few months later, something about losing confidence from the community. The big guy who was with him apparently moved away entirely. Whether that's all connected to our little incident, I don't know for sure. But I like to think that maybe some good came out of the whole situation. The funny thing is, if they just stayed on their own property and minded their own business, none of this would have happened. I never bothered them, never complained about their development, never tried to tell them what to do with their own land. But they couldn't resist the urge to try to control something that was never theirs to control. And that's how I ended up $25,000 richer, with better security and with legal protection against future harassment. Sometimes the system actually works the way it's supposed to. Looking back on the whole thing, I'm still amazed at how perfectly everything fell into place. The timing of the tow truck arriving before the deputy, the fact that I had everything documented, the way their own insurance company basically threw them under the bus to avoid a bigger loss. But mostly, I'm satisfied that when someone tried to push me around on my own property, I was able to push back effectively and legally. These days, when I'm working in my shop and I hear that automatic gate open for a legitimate delivery, I sometimes think about how quiet and peaceful everything is out here. And that's exactly the way I want to keep it. The whole experience taught me something important about dealing with bullies. Sometimes the best response isn't to get angry or escalate the conflict. Sometimes the best response is to stay calm, document everything, and let the legal system do what it's designed to do. I never wanted to be in a lawsuit. I never wanted drama with the neighbors. I just wanted to work on my property in peace. But when someone forces your hand, it's good to know you have options, and it's even better when those options work out in your favor. 6 months later, I'm still here, still working, still enjoying the quiet. The gate is still working perfectly. The security cameras are still recording everything. And according to the HOA's own official documents, my property is permanently off limits to their authority. I couldn't have asked for a better outcome. The end result is that I got exactly what I wanted from the beginning. Peace, quiet, and the right to use my own property without interference from people who think their rules apply to everyone. Plus, $25,000 and some really good stories to tell. Not a bad way to handle a trespassing problem. I often wonder what would have happened if those two guys had just apologized and left when I first asked them to. They would have saved themselves a lot of money and embarrassment. But then again, if they were the kind of people who would have done that, they probably wouldn't have trespassed in the first place. Some people just have to learn the hard way, and sometimes, if you're lucky, you get to be the one who teaches them. The next one is a malicious compliance story, so I am telling this story because the friend involved recently died from a short but valiant battle with cancer. She went from the doctor saying, "Well, we need to do a biopsy, it's probably nothing," to a call from her 5 weeks later saying she was going into hospice care, with just a few days to live. But saying goodbye brought up some tough memories, and a funny one. I decided to go to a meetup a different friend from work suggested I might enjoy, a tiki club that met weekly, but not only at tiki bars. 50s-style diners were also part of the club. It was at a local dessert place with a 50s diner flair that also served some good coffee. I think this is my second or third meetup with them, and it is a good group. Several of them rode motorcycles or even Vespa scooters as I did, an old 70s Honda CB 554-4. I sit down with my coffee and am talking with one of the guys who just bought a new Triumph Bonneville when someone comes up to the table, sits down, and takes a drink of my coffee. What the actual duck? I look over and it was, to my utter astonishment, Wayward. Wayward, which was her nickname, was an old girlfriend. We had a short but enjoyable summer together after I graduated from HS and she was working before going off to college. She went off to college, me to the Navy, and we lost track of each other, this being the days before the internet. I had been married for 15 years at this point and had a child. While she was single, it was a strange but platonic friendship that revolved around the meetup club. The dessert diner was a favorite, and every time I would get a coffee, she would steal it and drink from the other side. It was a thing we had. It was a good way to get out of the house as I worked from home, and that could be isolating, but it was not without its problems. One of the older women in the club was a real attention whore and instigator. She really did not like Wayward, who wasn't out there causing her problems, but Wayward did a lot for the club and it showed up Miss Attention Slut. My wife? Well, she had no interest in the club, and she saw it as a chance for her to hang out with her friends down the street or have them over. She thought the thing with Wayward was cute and charming. My wife has zero jealous bones in her body and cannot stand attention whores. She laughed when I told her the latest Miss Attention Slut's antics. Oh, and a true redhead's temper. So several years of friendship and the club go by, with various amounts of harassment and whispered rumors by Miss Attention Slut. It was the yearly club planning dinner, and Miss Attention Slut had had more than her share of box wine. Wayward, who got tied up with a patient and was late, came in after the dinner and gave me a hug. Miss Attention Slut said in a loud stage whisper to everyone, "Gee, I wonder what Miss Raccoon would think of that. Maybe someone should tell her." I saw red. I pulled out my phone and speed dialed my wife. "Oh, you have something to say to my wife, do you, Miss Attention Slut? Let me help you out here." I put it on speakerphone. "Hey, honey, someone here has something to say to you about me and Wayward." "Oh, hand me over to her, dear." And when Miss Attention Slut tried to say something, Miss Raccoon let her temper fly. She read her the riot act, mocked her, ripped her up one side and down the other, and told her to keep her nose out of other people's business if she liked the way it looked. She would never hurt anybody, but it sounded like she would, and that was what counted. The club heard it. It grew silent. Miss Attention Slut was imitating a fish out of water. She was turning even pinker than the wine could account for, and Miss Attention Slut was imitating a fish out of water making ah sounds. Then my wife started to laugh, which her laugh is very infectious. Other people started to laugh. Miss Attention Slut started to really turn pink, then ran out of the room. A 60-year-old woman crying like a toddler. Well, in the spirit of the Tiki Club, here is to you, Wayward. Fair winds and following seas. The next one is an entitled people story. So, I'm an English teacher at a secondary school. Recently, I had an encounter with a set of entitled parents who seemed to think the world revolved around their child's convenience, wants, and my schedule. Their child is in another teacher's class. That teacher and I get along great, and we both put in a lot of effort to make sure students are supported. This student still has contact with their previous teacher, and that doesn't help the actual teacher. The actual teacher tries hard, but the student is very rude, makes demands, disrupts the lessons, and tells her teacher to her face that she will ask, name redacted, to help her. Whatever this teacher does, it's of no use. She really wants to help, but draws proper boundaries. But apparently these parents didn't like how their child's actual teacher was doing her job, so they contacted me instead. Something that still surprises me, as the previous teacher was an absolute favorite. Another thing that surprises me is that they contacted me. I have never been a teacher to this student, but it seems I have a reputation. They start by asking if I could just give a bit of extra help after class. Okay, fine. I check my timetable, but I'm already stretched thin with marking, supervision, my own classes, and other duties I have. I also contacted the actual teacher to see if she knew. She didn't. This is something I don't like. If a student doesn't understand my way of explaining, I encourage them to ask other teachers. If they actually plan on doing this, I give the others a heads up. Transparency, I don't want any awkwardness between me and other teachers. I politely explain to the parents that I'm not the student's assigned teacher and that if their child needs help, they should contact their own teacher who already knows their progress and can adjust lessons accordingly. I also explain that due to our timetables and my other responsibilities, I don't have the time to facilitate this. That's when the entitlement dial hits max. They tell me their child doesn't work well with that teacher and they expect me to take over the support because you're clearly the better English teacher. Yes, they actually said that. I remind them, firmly but professionally, that all teachers are qualified and that I can't interfere with another colleague's class structure. Then comes the kicker. They demand that I do the child's oral exam instead of their assigned teacher. Apparently, they don't trust the other teacher to grade fairly and want someone more competent. I calmly explain that oral exams are standardized across the department and must be done by the class teacher. It's not negotiable. If it eases their mind, we have camera equipment that is used by student teachers. We can set this up and let another teacher review it when needed. No, he said, she said discussion. It's recorded. Again, transparency. Of course, they don't like that answer either. They try to guilt trip me with, you care about students, don't you? And, you don't want our child to fail, right? I stay firm and respond every email with a CC to the actual teacher. Then a couple of days after my latest response, the parents and student thought it would be a good idea to come and find me in my classroom, where I'm dealing with one of my own students who just hear the news that her mother was in a terrible car accident coming to pick her up from school. They burst in, start making their demands, all of them talking loudly and refusing to leave. I'm done. Our educational assistant knows what I'm dealing with, steps in, and they eventually leave. At this point, I escalate the whole thing to the student's mentor and their department head. Our school has several departments like care and welfare, building, green, cooking, etc. I document the emails, tell them about their visit, and let leadership handle it. Thankfully, the student's department head backs me up completely, reiterating the proper channels and boundaries. The parents tried to file a formal complaint against me and the actual teacher. I find out about this when my own department head and principal invite me for a chat. They actually let me read the email, and when I ask them about their opinions, they just start laughing. They know what happened and think I acted professionally, honest and correct. I was told not to worry, the student and their parents would have a meeting later that day with them. The message? The kind and professional version of don't terrorize my teachers to do your bidding while your own child is being disruptive and unresponsive to a teacher who actually wants to help within professional boundaries. The student did the oral exam with her own actual teacher and did a great job from what I've heard. Anyway, thank you for watching.